It feels like just yesterday that Google was losing the AI race. Bard was embarrassing itself. OpenAI looked untouchable, and everyone was convinced search was about to be disrupted for good. If you believed that, you weren't wrong. That was the dominant narrative. But here's the uncomfortable update. While everyone was arguing about chatbots and benchmarks, Google was quietly securing something far more important. This isn't a story about a model suddenly getting smarter. It's about why the race people thought they were watching was never the real race at all, and how Google ended up winning the one that actually matters. For a moment, Google really did look humiliated. Bard hallucinated answers that went viral for the wrong reasons. Search results told users to eat rocks. The image model controversy exploded overnight. And in the middle of all that, Google wiped out tens of billions in market value in days. The story wrote itself. Slow, bureaucratic giant loses to faster startups. And that's exactly why this phase matters, because it sets the baseline. This wasn't a company flexing dominance. This was a company being publicly embarrassed, doubted, and written off, which is important because what comes next doesn't look like a comeback story driven by hype or genius. It looks like something colder, something more structural. When a system survives its most visible failure, the question stops being, can it innovate, and becomes, what did it already own that made failure survivable? Everyone assumed Google was scrambling, that it was rushing to copy OpenAI, terrified of losing relevance, panicking behind the scenes. But that assumption missed the signal. Google didn't speed up, it slowed down. And that pause is what everyone misread. While competitors raced to prove they had the smartest chatbot, Google treated the moment as a diagnostic. It let others stress test the market, absorb the PR risk, and expose what users actually wanted from AI. That wasn't hesitation, it was calibration. Because when you already sit at the center of the internet, you don't need to win the first demo. You need to make sure the next phase locks in your advantage. This is the moment where the story stops being about who looked ahead and starts being about who could afford to wait. The pressure on Google wasn't just technological, it was legal. At the exact moment AI was exploding, Google was sitting in the middle of one of the largest antitrust cases in modern tech history. On paper, that should have been a threat. Breakup risk, structural limits, regulatory scrutiny. But AI quietly changed the terrain because the case was built around an old definition of search: links, rankings, default placements. AI doesn't fit neatly into that box. It blurs products, interfaces, and categories in ways the law wasn't written for. What looked like a legal headwind became something closer to a reset. Not because Google beat regulation, but because the game itself shifted faster than regulation could follow. When the definition of the market changes, so does the definition of monopoly. And that timing mattered, because while everyone was watching models compete, the rules that once constrained Google started losing their grip. While everyone else rushed to ship products, Google made a quieter move. It stopped treating AI as a feature and started treating it as infrastructure. Instead of chasing the fastest chatbot release, it focused on the layers underneath: compute, cost, integration, and control. This is the strategic pivot most people missed. Google didn't need to prove demand. Others already did that for free. What it needed was to make sure that once AI demand became permanent, it would flow through systems Google already owned. That's a very different mindset. Startups have to move fast because they're fighting for survival. Platforms that already dominate can afford to move slow because their real advantage isn't speed, it's absorption. Google wasn't trying to win the moment. It was trying to make sure every future moment ran through its stack. To understand why that mattered, you have to stop thinking about AI as a single product and start seeing it as a stack, 5 layers working together. At the bottom are chips, the raw compute that makes everything possible. Above that, data centers, energy, cooling, and scale. Then, foundational models, the part everyone argues about on Twitter. On top of that, products, search, email, documents, video. And finally, hardware and access, the devices and interfaces people actually touch. Most companies are fighting over one layer, usually the model. Google owns pieces of all 5. That's the shift. When you control multiple layers, you don't need to win any single one outright. You can subsidize losses, absorb inefficiencies, and wait out competitors. This is the part most AI race coverage misses. The race isn't about who has the best model today, it's about who owns the stack that decides how models get built, deployed, and used tomorrow. One of the most overlooked advantages in that stack is chips. While most of the AI world depends on NVIDIA, Google spent the last decade quietly building its own silicon, TPUs. That decision didn't make headlines at first because it wasn't exciting, but it changed the economics of AI completely. Google doesn't just buy compute at market prices, it designs it around its own workloads, runs it inside its own data centers, and optimizes it at scale. That means lower costs, tighter integration, and fewer bottlenecks when demand spikes. And here's the uncomfortable implication. When everyone else is competing for scarce GPUs, Google isn't just a customer, it's insulated. It can train, deploy, and iterate without waiting in line. This is how infrastructure becomes leverage. You don't need to beat competitors on features if you can outlast them on cost and supply. And in an AI world where compute is power, owning the factory matters more than owning the brand. AI didn't just stress models, it stressed cloud economics. Training and running large models is brutally expensive, and for most companies, that cost shows up immediately in margins. This is where Google's position quietly flips the board. It runs some of the most efficient data centers in the world, controls its own energy strategy, and spreads costs across search, ads, YouTube, and enterprise cloud. AI doesn't break its balance sheet, it smooths it. For competitors, every AI query is a cost center. For Google, it's an efficiency problem it's been solving for years. This is why Google Cloud suddenly looks different under AI pressure. What once lagged now becomes strategic because the company that can run AI cheapest can run it longest. And when AI becomes a permanent layer of the internet, endurance matters more than excitement. Most people still think this race will be decided by who has the smartest model. That's the wrong lens. Models converge, benchmarks fluctuate. Today's breakthrough becomes tomorrow's baseline. What doesn't reset is distribution. Google doesn't need users to try its AI. It places it directly inside the tools they already live in. Search, Gmail, Docs, Maps, YouTube. There's no switching moment, no new habit to form. AI just shows up where decisions are already being made, and that's the real moat. People don't choose the best model in the abstract, they use the one that's closest, fastest, and least disruptive to their routine. Once AI becomes ambient instead of optional, competition stops being about quality and starts being about presence. And Google's presence isn't an app, it's the default layer of the internet itself. Control doesn't stop at software, it extends to interfaces. Phones, operating systems, browsers, and whatever comes next decide how AI is experienced in daily life. Google sits unusually close to that layer. Android, Chrome, Pixel devices, and emerging wearable and ambient computing projects aren't just products, they're distribution channels for behavior. When AI moves from typing prompts to living inside voice, vision, navigation, and context, whoever owns the interface doesn't just answer questions, they shape decisions. This is the next quiet shift most people underestimate. The future of AI won't be a website you visit, it will be something you're surrounded by. And when that happens, the company that controls how information appears, when it interrupts you, and what it prioritizes isn't just competing in AI, it's setting the rules for how humans interact with intelligence itself. At this point, calling this an AI race starts to feel misleading. What's actually happening looks less like competition and more like consolidation. Smaller players still innovate, new models still launch, startups still make noise. But when you zoom out, most of that activity routes back through a handful of giants that control compute, cloud access, distribution, and capital. AI didn't break the old power centers, it reinforced them. The companies that already owned infrastructure, users, and cash didn't get disrupted, they got upgraded. And Google sits in a uniquely strong position inside that shift. It doesn't need to win every battle because the system keeps pulling value back toward the layers it controls. This is what people miss when they focus on headlines. competition still exists at the surface, but underneath, the structure is hardening. And once a technology moves from innovation to infrastructure, power stops being fluid and starts becoming fixed. So the uncomfortable conclusion is this: the AI race didn't end with a dramatic victory. It ended with a quiet lock-in. Google didn't suddenly out-innovate everyone. It outlasted them, out-integrated them, and out-owned the layers that matter once AI becomes permanent. This was never about having the best chatbot. It was about owning the system that chatbots run inside. AI didn't disrupt Google's dominance, it upgraded it. And that's the part worth sitting with. If intelligence is becoming centralized inside a few vertically integrated stacks, then the real question isn't who wins the next model release. It's whether competition, choice, and decentralization can survive a future where AI doesn't just answer questions, it decides how information flows. Because once control shifts from innovation to infrastructure, the race doesn't continue, it settles.